I thought the lipstick on his collar was the ultimate betrayal. But I was wrong. When his fiercest rival knocked on my door at midnight and told me to open the calculator app on his phone, I discovered something far more brutal than an affair. The man I called my husband was not just cheating on me, he was selling my life, piece by piece, for a sick wager I never knew existed. My name is Morgan, and at 33 years old, I had become a ghost in my own life. I stood in the center of our kitchen in Emerald Hills, a space that looked more like a showroom than a place where human beings actually ate. The marble countertops were cold under my fingertips. Beside me hummed an espresso machine that cost $4,000, a chrome monstrosity that Blake had insisted on buying because his boss had one. I hated coffee. I drank tea. But in this house, my preferences were secondary to the aesthetic. Blake was a sales director at Nexus Corp, and he treated our marriage exactly like one of his high-stakes mergers. He provided the capital and the image, and I was expected to provide the silent, supportive asset management. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I used to be a senior data analyst. I used to manage teams and interpret complex algorithms that Blake could not even begin to read. Now, I was just the woman who made sure his shirts were pressed and his ego was polished. The erosion of my spirit had not happened overnight. It was a slow drip. It started with the jokes. We would be out with his colleagues, men in expensive suits drinking scotch that cost $50 a glass. And Blake would wrap an arm around me. "Morgan here thinks she's a wizard with numbers," he would say, flashing that charming grin that fooled everyone but me. But honestly, I have to double-check the grocery bill every week just to make sure we aren't bankrupt. They would laugh. I would smile, a tight, painful expression that felt like a mask gluing to my skin. I never corrected him. I never told them that I had earned 20% more than him before we got married. I stayed silent because Blake told me that correcting him in public was emasculating. That control extended to our bank accounts. Despite my background, I had no access to our investments. Blake handled everything. He gave me a weekly allowance of $300 for household expenses, demanding receipts for every cent. It was humiliating to ask my husband for money to buy feminine products. But I did it. I told myself it was for the best. "You're too emotional with money, Morgan," he had said once. "I'm building an empire for us. You just enjoy the ride." The kitchen silence was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Blake walked in, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and the electric energy of a man who loved the sound of his own voice. He was on his phone, typing furiously, a smirk playing on his lips. As soon as he saw me, the smile vanished, and he flipped the phone face down on the counter with a practiced motion. My stomach twisted. It was a knot of anxiety that had become my constant companion. "Who were you texting?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. He sighed, loosening his tie. "Work, Morgan. Always work. You wouldn't understand the pressure. The guys are counting on me for the quarterly projections." I wanted to scream that I understood projections better than he ever would. Instead, I nodded. "He is stressed," I told myself. "He is doing this for us." I repeated these lies like a mantra, trying to drown out the voice in my head that screamed something was wrong. He walked over to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of sparkling water. He took a long sip before turning to face me, his eyes scanning my outfit with a critical gaze. "We have a dinner tonight," he announced, not asking, but commanding. "The regional vice president is flying in. It's at the Obsidian. Table is booked for 7:30. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch was cold. "Wear the black dress," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that made my skin crawl. "The one with the low back. And Morgan, please try to be charming tonight. Just look pretty and, well, try not to bore them with your little stories." I looked at him, feeling the air leave my lungs. I just want to make a good impression. Blake, I whispered. I know, he said, patting my cheek with a patronizing tap. That is why I'm telling you what to do. Dress sexy, but don't talk much. Leave the thinking to the men. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, picking up his phone and sliding it into his pocket without breaking stride. I stood there, alone again, surrounded by expensive appliances that felt like the bars of a very glamorous cage. The obsidian was suffocatingly expensive. The air smelled of truffle oil and old money, and the clinking of silverware against fine china felt like a headache building behind my eyes. I sat next to Blake, my hand resting on his knee exactly as he had instructed, a silent accessory to his ambition. The table was crowded with the upper echelon of Nexus Corp, men who spoke in volumes that demanded attention and women who laughed a second too late at their jokes. I tried to engage. When the conversation turned to market volatility, I saw an opening. Actually, I started, my voice clear. The current fluctuations in the tech sector remind me of the correction we saw back in 2018. If you look at the data models, Blake's hand clamped down on my knee, hard enough to bruise. He cut me off with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Oh, sweetheart, he boomed, drawing the attention of the entire table. Let's not pretend you know what you are talking about. You read one article on your phone and suddenly you are an analyst. I froze, my mouth shutting with an audible click. I was just making a point. Blake. And it was adorable, he said, winking at the regional vice president across the table. The real humiliation came during the third course. Blake stood up, tapping his spoon against his wine glass. The table went quiet. He was in his element, the charismatic leader, the loving husband, to success. He began, raising his glass, and to our wives, who keep us grounded. You know, just yesterday, Morgan came to me with a graph. She was so serious. She pointed to the red line on the stock ticker and asked if that meant the temperature in the office was getting too hot. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. I had never said that. I had a master's degree in data science. But the table erupted in laughter. It was a roar of amusement at my expense. Blake looked down at me, his smile cruel and triumphant. She is a beautiful flower, gentlemen. But, well, let's just say she is a bit hollow on the inside. The laughter grew louder. My face burned. I felt naked, stripped of my intellect and reduced to a punchline. I stared at my plate, unable to lift my head until I felt a gaze that was heavy and cold. I looked up. At the far end of the table sat Valerie. She was not laughing. She was wearing a sharp gray suit that made her look like a weapon. She held her wine glass near her lips, her eyes locked on mine. There was no pity there. It was a look of intense calculation, like she was assessing the structural integrity of a bridge before blowing it up. It was a warning. I could not breathe. "Excuse me," I murmured, pushing my chair back. I need the ladies' room." I walked away as fast as my heels would allow, the sound of their laughter chasing me down the hall. I pushed into the restroom and leaned against the cold sink, trying to stop my hands from shaking. A moment later, 2 other women from the party entered. They didn't see me in the alcove. "Blake is on fire tonight," one said, reapplying her lipstick. "He is disgusting," the other replied, her voice hushed. "But he is winning. Have you seen the latest rankings? He is leading the game by a mile." "Shh," the first one hissed. "Don't talk about the game here. If HR hears about the pool, we are all fired." They left, leaving me confused and terrified. The game. What game? The ride home was excruciating. The silence in the car was thick enough to choke on. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, fighting back tears. "Oh, stop it!" Blake snapped, breaking the silence. He didn't even look at me. "You have been sulking since dessert. You are ruining my night." Morgan. I bring you to a $500 dinner, and you sit there with a face like a funeral. You humiliated me. Blake, I whispered, my voice trembling. You called me hollow. It was a joke, he yelled, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. God, you are so uptight. Everyone was laughing. They loved it. Why can't you just be supportive for once? Why do you always have to make it about you? I turned back to the window, the city blurring through my tears. He was right. I thought, maybe I was just being sensitive. Maybe I was the problem. But as we turned into our driveway, I couldn't shake the image of Valerie's eyes or the whispered words about a game that my husband was winning. The morning sun offered no warmth as it filtered through the high windows of our dining room. I sat across from Blake, watching him scroll through his tablet while he ate his eggs. The silence was heavy, filled with the unspoken wreckage of the previous night. I had barely slept. The sound of the laughter at the restaurant replaying in my mind on an agonizing loop. I needed closure. I needed an apology. Blake, I started, my voice steady but quiet. We need to talk about what you said at the dinner. It really hurt me. He didn't even look up from the screen. He took a sip of coffee and sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. Oh, God, Morgan, are we really doing this? It is 7 a.m. You humiliated me. I insisted, gripping my mug tighter. You called me hollow. You made up lies about me being incompetent. Blake finally set the tablet down. He looked at me with a mix of pity and annoyance, the kind of look a parent gives a toddler throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. You are so sensitive, he said, shaking his head. It was a joke. Morgan, a joke. Everyone there knew I was kidding. That is how these dinners work. We roast each other. We bond. But you always have to make it about your feelings. But it wasn't funny to me. I said, it felt cruel. That is because you are looking for reasons to be a victim, he shot back, his voice rising. You are doing this for attention, aren't you? You couldn't handle that the spotlight was on me, so now you have to manufacture this drama to make me feel guilty. It is exhausting. Morgan, honestly, sometimes I wonder if you are losing your grip on reality. I blinked, the sting of his words hitting me like a physical slap. Maybe I had misread the room. Maybe the other wives had been laughing with me, not at me. The seeds of doubt, which he had been planting for years, began to sprout rapidly. I started to question my own memory of the night. Had I been scowling? Had I been the wet blanket he described? I just wanted you to respect me, I whispered. I do respect you. He lied smoothly, picking up his tablet again. I respect you enough to tell you when you are being hysterical. Later that morning, after Blake had retreated to his home office, I went to collect his suit from the night before to take it to the dry cleaner. As I checked the pockets, my fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was a receipt, printed on thick, expensive paper. Membership fee, the Taming Hall. Amount $5,000. My breath hitched. $5,000. That was more than my entire household budget for 6 months. What was the Taming Hall? A golf club, a cigar lounge. I walked to the office door and knocked. Blake yelled for me to come in. He was sitting at his desk, staring at his screens. What is this? I asked, placing the receipt on the desk. $5,000. Blake. You told me money was tight. You yelled at me for buying organic produce last week. Blake looked at the receipt, and his face darkened instantly. He stood up so abruptly that his chair slammed against the bookshelf behind him. Who gave you the right to go through my pockets? He roared. I was doing the laundry, I yelled back, my fear giving way to a sudden surge of adrenaline. What is this club? Why does it cost $5,000? It is an investment, he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. It is for networking. I meet high-level clients there. You think this house pays for itself? You think your lifestyle is free? Stop interfering in business you do not understand. Morgan. He snatched the receipt from the desk and crumpled it in his fist. Then, he picked up his phone. He looked me dead in the eye, his expression shifting from rage to a cold, mocking challenge. You want to snoop, he hissed. Fine. Watch this. He tapped the screen, navigating to the settings. I am changing the passcode, right now, because clearly, you cannot be trusted with my privacy. He typed in a new code, shielding the screen with his body, but making sure I saw the action. It was a deliberate act of exclusion. He was locking me out, not just of his phone, but of his life. Get out, he said, sitting back down. I fled the room, my heart pounding against my ribs. The house felt massive and empty, yet I felt claustrophobic. The walls of Emerald Hills were closing in. I was trapped in a marriage where my reality was constantly denied, and my financial security was being drained for something I wasn't allowed to name. I went to the kitchen and stared at my own phone, feeling a wave of isolation so profound it made me dizzy. Suddenly, the screen lit up. A text message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, my hands trembling. Don't believe what he says about you. The anonymous text was the catalyst I needed to stop crying and start digging. If Blake was hiding a $5,000 club membership, what else was he hiding? I waited until he left for work. Then I opened my laptop to check our joint accounts. My heart hammered against my ribs as I typed in the password. Access denied. I tried again. And again. Cold sweat pricked at my hairline. I called the bank, but the automated voice told me I was no longer an authorized user on the primary checking account. I grabbed my purse and drove straight to the branch, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The branch manager, a man who had smiled at us when we bought the house 3 years ago, looked uncomfortable as he turned his monitor toward me. Mrs. Sterling, he said, adjusting his glasses. I assumed you were aware. The joint status was revoked 2 weeks ago, and the withdrawal for the equity line of credit. Surely you signed the papers. What equity line? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The mortgage, he said, looking down at his desk. Mr. Sterling took out a second mortgage against the property last month. It was a high-risk business loan. The room spun. I had paid 70% of the down payment on our home with the inheritance my grandmother left me. It was the one thing I thought was safe. Now, Blake had leveraged the roof over my head for a gamble I knew nothing about. I left the bank feeling numb, but the numbness quickly curdled into a cold, sharp rage. I needed to see him. I needed to look him in the eye. I drove to Nexus Corp, clutching a file folder I knew he had left on the dining table, a perfect excuse to be there without raising suspicion. The lobby of Nexus Corp was a cathedral of glass and steel. I walked toward the elevators, and that was when I saw her. Valerie. She was walking toward the exit, typing on her phone. She looked impeccable in a navy suit, her heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the polished floor. She looked up and saw me. For a second, her stride faltered. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She walked straight toward me, passing so close our shoulders almost brushed. "Excuse me," she muttered, not stopping. As she passed, a small yellow sticky note fluttered from her hand and landed on the floor by my shoe. It was too deliberate to be an accident. I looked around. The receptionist was on the phone. The security guard was looking at a monitor. I knelt down, pretending to tie my shoe, and snatched the paper. I unfolded it in the safety of the elevator. Tonight, 9 o'clock, when he is live streaming. I stared at the messy handwriting. Live streaming Blake. My husband was a man who mocked social media influencers. He didn't even have an Instagram account. The elevator doors opened, but I didn't step out. I pressed the button for the lobby and went back to my car. I couldn't face him yet, not with this knowledge burning a hole in my pocket. I drove home, the note burning in my mind, live streaming. When Blake came home that evening, I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. I forced a smile onto my face. It felt like wearing a mask made of lead. "Did you have a good day?" I asked. "Busy," he said, grabbing a beer. "Disasters everywhere. I have to hop on a call with the Tokyo team tonight. Time zones are a nightmare." He was lying. I could see the tightness in his jaw, the way his eyes avoided mine. "Okay," I said. "I will just read in the bedroom." At 8:55, Blake went into his home office. I heard the heavy click of the lock turning. He never locked the door for work calls. I stood in the hallway, my ear pressed against the cold wood of the door. The house was silent, amplifying every sound from inside. "Welcome back, gentlemen," Blake's voice boomed through the wood. It wasn't his professional, measured work voice. It was loud, boisterous, and brimming with a terrifying energy. "Tonight is going to be a good one," he shouted, followed by a laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "I have got a little surprise for the pot." "Who is ready to lose some money?" My blood ran cold. He wasn't talking to Tokyo. He was performing for an audience, and I had a sickening feeling that I was the prop. The air in the living room was so heavy it felt solid, pressing against my chest like a lead vest. I sat on the edge of the pristine beige sectional, my hands clasped together so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The only light came from the hallway lamp, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. I watched the digital clock on the cable box. 9:28. 9:29. Every minute dragged by with agonizing slowness. From down the hall, behind the locked door of the study, I could hear Blake. He wasn't speaking in the measured, professional tones of a business meeting. He was shouting, laughing, his voice booming with a manic energy that made my stomach turn. It sounded like a locker room, not a boardroom. At exactly 9:30, a sharp sound shattered the oppressive silence. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't a polite tap. It was urgent, aggressive, demanding to be answered. My heart leaped into my throat. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked to the front door. I checked the peephole, but the porch light was flickering. I took a deep breath and unlocked the deadbolt. I swung the door open and froze. Valerie stood on my welcome mat. The wind was whipping rain sideways, but she didn't seem to notice. She was wearing a long, black vinyl raincoat that glistened under the street lamps. Her hair, usually sprayed into a perfect helmet of corporate armor, was damp and plastered to her forehead, but it was her face that shocked me the most. She wore no makeup. Without her sharp eyeliner and red lipstick, she looked younger, paler, and consumed by a raw, seething fury. "Valerie," I breathed out. She didn't step inside. She stood firmly on the threshold, refusing to cross the line into my home. Her eyes darted past me, toward the hallway where Blake's laughter still echoed. "Is he in there?" she asked, her voice low and rough. "Yes," I answered, clutching the doorframe for support. "He said he is. He is in a meeting." Valerie let out a sound that was half laugh, half snarl. Her lip curled in pure disgust. "A meeting," she repeated, the word dripping with venom. "I am not doing this for you, Morgan. I want to be clear. I don't even like you. I think you are pathetic for staying with him." I flinched, but I didn't look away. "Then why are you here? Because he is reckless," she hissed, stepping just an inch closer, the smell of rain and cold air radiating off her. "He is getting sloppy. He tried to recruit a junior analyst today. He is trying to expand his little club, and he is going to drag the whole department down into the mud with him. I worked too hard to let a narcissist like Blake destroy my reputation." She looked me dead in the eye, her expression intense and terrifying. "He is not holding a meeting, Morgan. He is hosting a session. It is a secret society, a group of men who think they are gods." My blood ran cold. The note about the live stream suddenly made a sickening kind of sense. What do I do? I whispered. Valerie looked toward the study again, her jaw tightening. He doesn't lock his phone, she said rapidly, the words tumbling out like she wanted to get rid of them. He is too arrogant. He thinks you are too stupid to look. But not his main phone. The other one. He has another phone. Go in there, Valerie commanded. Find a reason. Bring him water. Say the house is on fire. I don't care. Just get into that room. Look under the cushion of the leather sofa. The one facing his desk. He tapes it to the underside. I stared at her, my mind reeling. A burner phone taped under the sofa. It sounded like something from a movie. Not my life. Take it, Valerie continued, her eyes boring into mine. Open the calculator app. It isn't a calculator. It is a vault. Enter the code 1109. 1109, I repeated, my voice shaking. Do it tonight, she said, backing away into the rain. Before he deletes the history. Valerie, wait, I called out. But she didn't stop. She turned and walked briskly down the driveway, disappearing into the dark, wet night without looking back. She left me standing in the open doorway, shivering in the cold wind, armed with a 4-digit code that felt like the pin to a grenade. I waited in the hallway, pressing my ear against the cold wood of the study door. The boisterous laughter had ceased, replaced by the sound of heavy footsteps moving toward the ensuite bathroom. Then came the distinct click of the bathroom door closing and the rush of water in the sink. This was my chance. My hands were shaking so violently that I almost dropped the small brass key. Blake believed I had lost this key 2 years ago in the garden, but I had kept it hidden in the back of my jewelry box. A small token of independence I had been too afraid to use until now. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft, metallic click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. I pushed the door open and slipped inside. The room smelled of expensive scotch and the lingering scent of his cologne. I did not look at the computer screens that were glowing on his desk. I went straight to the black leather sofa in the corner, the one facing his workspace. I dropped to my knees and shoved my hand under the middle cushion. My fingers brushed against the rough underside of the leather, searching until they hit something hard and plastic held in place by sticky duct tape. I ripped it free. It was an old smartphone, one of his previous models that he claimed he had traded in. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up with a generic background. I swiped up and scanned the apps. There were no games, no social media, just basic utilities. I found the calculator app. Please, I whispered to the empty room. Please, be wrong. I typed in the numbers Valerie had given me. 1, 1, 0, 9. The screen did not show a calculation. Instead, it flickered black and a new interface loaded. At the top of the screen, in bold red letters, was the name of the group Chat the Taming Hall. I felt bile rise in my throat. I scrolled down, and my breath hitched in a sob that I had to smother with my hand. It was me. There were hundreds of files, photos, videos, audio recordings, but they were not the happy moments of a marriage. They were a catalog of my misery. I clicked on a video dated 3 days ago. It showed me sitting on the kitchen floor, weeping into my hands, my hair a mess. Below it, a caption read, "Subject is breaking. Odds on hospitalization by Friday." I scrolled further. I saw profile names I recognized. Titan Sales was Blake's boss. Closer. Dave was the colleague who had smiled at me at the Christmas party. They were all there, and they were betting. I put $2,000 on a suicide attempt before Christmas. One comment read, "Nah, she is too weak." Another replied, "She will just develop a pill habit. 1,000 on Xanax addiction." But the worst part was the content posted by the admin, a user named Alpha Blake. I clicked on a video titled Discipline Session. In the clip, I was screaming, throwing a pillow at the camera. My face twisted in rage. It made me look deranged, violent, unstable. But I remembered that night. He had spent 2 hours calmly listing every insecurity I had, telling me my mother hated me, until I finally snapped. He had edited out his voice. He had cut the footage to remove his provocation, leaving only my reaction. He was framing me. He was building a digital archive to prove that I was the abuser, and he was the long-suffering victim. Then I saw the most recent message, sent only 10 minutes ago by Blake. "Gentlemen, the pot is getting stale. Let's spice it up. Tonight, I am going to ask her about the fertility treatments again. I am going to tell her that it is a good thing she is barren because she would make a terrible mother." My heart stopped. The cruelty was so precise, so calculated, it felt like a physical blow. I read the next line of his text. "Kicking the hornet's nest now. Odds are $5,000 that she smashes the vase in the hallway. Who is in?" I heard the toilet flush in the bathroom. The water stopped running. The handle on the bathroom door began to turn. I stared at the screen, at the words that reduced my deepest pain to a gambling prop. "You monster," I hissed, my voice trembling with a hatred I had never felt before. "You sick, twisted monster!" I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle the retching sound that clawed its way up my throat. The nausea was overwhelming, a physical rejection of the man I had shared a bed with for 5 years. But as I stared at the screen, watching a video of myself sobbing over a burnt dinner while Blake mocked me in the background, something snapped inside my chest. It was not the sound of my heart breaking. It was the sound of a fuse being lit. The tears that had been gathering in my eyes evaporated, replaced by a dry, scorching heat. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Our marriage was not a tragedy of falling out of love. It was a script. Every argument, every insult, every time he triggered my anxiety or gaslit me into questioning my sanity, it was all performance art. He had orchestrated my pain for an audience of wealthy, misogynistic sociopaths, and he was cashing in on my misery. He wasn't just a bad husband. He was a predator. "You sold me," I whispered to the empty room, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a lethal clarity. "You sold me piece by piece. I heard the faucet turn off in the bathroom. I had seconds, maybe a minute at most." My fingers flew across the screen. I did not panic. Panic was for victims, and I was done being a victim. I selected the entire chat history, the videos, the betting logs, and the humiliating photos. I hit the share button and typed in the address of a secure, encrypted email account I had created years ago for a freelance project and never told Blake about. Sending the progress bar seemed to crawl. I watched the percentage climb, 20%, 50%. While the files uploaded, I backed out of the chat and saw one more folder at the bottom of the directory. It was labeled simply Exit Plan. I tapped it. The documents inside made my blood run cold. There were drafted legal forms for an involuntary psychiatric hold. He had been documenting my instability to build a case that I was a danger to myself, aiming to have me committed to a state facility. Below that were transfer requests for our remaining joint assets and the deed to the house my house to be signed over to him via power of attorney once I was incapacitated. And then, the reason for it all, a folder of photos titled Serena. She was young, blonde, and looked like a model. There were flight itineraries booked for 2 months from now. One-way tickets to the Cayman Islands for Blake Sterling and Serena Davis. He was going to lock me away in a padded room, steal my inheritance, and fly off into the sunset with his mistress using my money. Upload complete. The bathroom doorknob rattled. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I quickly closed the apps, swiped the background to clear the recent history, and shoved the phone back under the leather cushion. I pressed the duct tape down, smoothing it out just as the bathroom door began to creak open. I scrambled backward, rising to my feet and slipping out of the study door just as Blake stepped out of the bathroom. I pulled the door shut silently and leaned against the hallway wall, breathing hard. Honey Blake's voice called out from inside the study, sounding suspicious. Did you hear something? I forced my voice to sound groggy and weak. I was just getting water. Blake, I'm going to bed. Good, he shouted back, his tone dismissing me entirely. Don't wait up. I walked to our bedroom, my legs moving with a mechanical precision. I did not go to the kitchen. I did not get water. I went straight to the bed that we shared and lay down on my side, staring into the darkness. Hours later, Blake slid into bed beside me. He smelled of scotch and satisfaction. He draped a heavy arm over my waist, a gesture that used to feel like comfort, but now felt like the coil of a snake. I lay perfectly still, listening to the rhythm of his breathing as he drifted off to sleep, confident in his victory, arrogant in his control. He thought he was sleeping next to his broken, hollow wife. He had no idea that the woman lying beside him had died in that study. I opened my eyes in the pitch black of the room. I did not blink. I did not cry. I visualized the exit plan he had so carefully crafted, and I began to rewrite it in my head. He wanted a show. He wanted to bet on my destruction. Okay, Blake, I thought, a cold smile touching my lips in the dark. Let's see how much you are willing to lose. I was no longer the prey in his twisted game. I was the hunter. And the hunt had just begun. For 3 days, I became the perfect Stepford wife. I cooked his steak exactly medium rare. I kept the house silent when he was on calls, and I apologized for breathing too loudly. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Blake soaked it up like a dry sponge. He thought his discipline had finally worked, that he had broken the wild horse. He had no idea he was living with a viper. While he was at the office, gloating over his victory, I was meeting with Arthur Vance, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the city. I wrote him a retainer check for $25,000 using the inheritance my mother had left me, money Blake knew nothing about because I had kept it in a trust under her maiden name. I do not just want a divorce, I told Vance, sliding the USB drive across his mahogany desk. I want a scorched earth policy. I want him to have nothing left but the suit on his back. Vance had smiled, a shark recognizing blood in the water. Leave it to me. My next stop was a secluded bench in the botanical gardens, where Valerie was waiting. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red. She wasn't the shark I had seen at the dinner party anymore. She was prey. He forced me, Valerie whispered, clutching a paper coffee cup, her hands trembling. I handle the accounts for the betting ring. He said if I didn't launder the money through the shell companies, he would release photos of me. Intimate photos from an office party 3 years ago. If you help me, I said, my voice devoid of emotion, I will make sure you are listed as a witness, not a co-conspirator, but I need the financial records. All of them. She handed me a thick envelope. It is all there. The offshore accounts, the bribes, everything. The stage was set. The weekend approached, bringing with it the Nexus Corp product launch. Blake was scheduled to present Project Ether, a revolutionary data prediction model. He had been bragging about it for weeks. The sick irony was that Project Ether was my work. It was a model I had built 2 years ago on our home server, which he had copied and claimed as his own genius. Friday night, the night before the launch. Blake went to sleep early. He took a sleeping pill to ensure he was fresh for his big day. At 2 a.m, I slipped out of bed and crept into the study. His laptop was on the desk. He hadn't even bothered to shut it down. Why would he? In his mind, I was too stupid to understand computers. I sat down and opened the presentation folder. There it was. Sterling Keynote Final, PPTX. I didn't delete it. That would cause a panic. Instead, I opened the file and replaced every single slide. I replaced the revenue projections with the screenshots of the betting pool. I replaced the algorithm diagrams with the videos of him mocking his boss. I replaced the conclusion with the exit plan documents detailing his embezzlement. I saved the file with the exact same name. I closed the laptop. I went back to bed and slept better than I had in years. The next morning, the sunlight streamed into the bedroom. Blake was already in the shower, singing. I stood by the bed, ironing his charcoal gray suit. I pressed the steam button, watching the wrinkles vanish, just as I was about to make his life vanish. He walked out, a towel wrapped around his waist, radiating arrogance. Nervous for me, he asked. Smirking. I held up the jacket. It was warm and crisp. I walked over to him and helped him put it on, smoothing the lapels with gentle hands. I looked him in the eyes, and for the first time in a long time, my smile reached my eyes. Not at all, I said softly. I think today is going to be unforgettable. Today. Blake, you will shine the brightest. He kissed my forehead, oblivious to the blade hovering over his neck. That is my good girl. He left the house whistling. I watched his car disappear down the driveway. Then I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. It is done, I said. Execute the asset freeze. The grand hall of Nexus Corp was a cavern of glass and light, packed with 300 industry leaders and flashing camera strobes. The air hummed with the low murmur of anticipation. I walked down the center aisle, the sound of my heels absorbed by the plush carpet, feeling every eye in the room shift toward me. Blake had told me to wear navy or black, something that would blend into the background. Instead, I wore red. Not just red, but a screaming crimson scarlet that hugged every curve and demanded attention. I was the splash of blood on his canvas of gray. I took my seat in the front row, directly across from the podium, crossing my legs and folding my hands in my lap. I looked serene. I looked like a supportive wife. Inside, my heart was beating a war drum. The lights dimmed, and the spotlight hit center stage. Blake walked out to thunderous applause. He looked every inch the golden boy of the tech world, his smile dazzling, his posture commanding. He gripped the podium, bathing in the adoration. Welcome, everyone, Blake said, his voice smooth and practiced. Today, we talk about the future, but before we talk about algorithms, we must talk about values. We must talk about ethics and responsibility, because without a moral compass, technology is just a dangerous weapon. I almost laughed out loud. The audacity was breathtaking. He paused for effect, looking down at me with a quick, approving nod, assuming my presence meant I was back under his thumb. I present to you Project Ether, he announced, raising the clicker high in the air and pressing the button. He turned to the massive LED screen behind him, expecting to see the sleek blue logo of his stolen project. The screen flickered to life. But there was no logo. There was no graph. Projected 20 feet high, in high definition, was a screenshot of a group chat. The header read The Taming Hall. The room went deadly silent. The text on the screen was massive, legible even from the back row. Blake Alpha. Just bet $5,000 on the wife crying during dinner. Easy money. Closer. Dave. She is pathetic. How do you stand her, Blake Alpha? She is a golden goose. Once I get her committed, the inheritance is mine. 2 months tops. A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. Someone gasped. A camera shutter clicked rapidly. Blake stared at the screen, his smile frozen in a rictus of terror. He clicked the remote frantically. Excuse me. He stammered into the microphone, his voice cracking. We seem to have a technical glitch. If the AV team could just... He pressed the button again. The slide changed, but it did not go to his presentation. It went to a video. Audio exploded through the hall's surround sound system. It was Blake's voice, clear as a bell. My boss, Titan. The guy is a dinosaur. I have been skimming 10% off the marketing budget for 6 months, and the old fool hasn't even noticed. He is too busy playing golf to realize I am robbing him blind. On the screen, The video showed Blake sitting in his office, laughing as he poured a drink, mocking the very man sitting 3 seats away from me. I glanced to my right. The CEO of Nexus Corp, a formidable man in his 60s, was slowly standing up. His face had turned a dangerous shade of purple. On stage, Blake was unraveling. He hit the escape key on his laptop, slamming his finger down on the keyboard. "Turn it off," he screamed at the technicians in the booth. "Cut the feed." But they couldn't. I had installed a kernel-level lock on his machine the night before. The presentation was on a loop, and it was password protected with a code only I knew. The screen shifted again. Now it was a spreadsheet. The betting log. It listed names, dates, and amounts. It showed wagers on women in the office, bets on who could sleep with whom, and grotesque calculations about my mental health. This is a deep fake," Blake yelled, sweat pouring down his forehead, ruining his perfect makeup. "This is AI generated. I am being hacked." Then came the final blow. The speakers blasted a recording from just last week. "I don't love her. I never did. She is just an ATM with legs. Once I sign the power of attorney, I am shipping her off to the loony bin and taking Serena to the Caymans." The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were roaring. The sound of hundreds of people realizing they were witnessing a public execution was deafening. Blake stood center stage, stripped of his mask, a tiny, trembling figure against the towering backdrop of his own sins. He looked out at the audience, his eyes wild, searching for an ally. He found me. I sat perfectly still in my red dress, the only calm point in the chaos. I locked eyes with him. I didn't smile. I simply raised my eyebrows, a silent acknowledgement of the checkmate. "Morgan," he whispered into the hot mic, his voice full of horror. "Morgan, what did you do?" The chaos in the hall was deafening, a cacophony of shouting voices and ringing alarms. I stood up from my seat, the movement fluid and deliberate. The crimson silk of my dress rustled softly, a sharp contrast to the gray suits surrounding me. I walked toward the stage stairs, and strangely, the crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I stepped up onto the platform, walked past the frozen, sweating figure of my husband, and took the microphone from the podium. I tapped it once. The sound echoed through the speakers, cutting through the noise. "Silence," I said. My voice calm but commanding. The room fell instantly quiet. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. I looked at Blake, who was shaking, his face pale as a sheet. "This," I said, gesturing to the screen where his hateful messages were still looping, "is the man you trusted with your money. This is the real Director Blake. And this," I pulled a folded document from my clutch and held it up, "is a court order." As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the hall burst open. My lawyer, Arthur Vance, strode in, flanked by 4 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit. They marched down the aisle with a grim purpose. "Blake Sterling," one of the officers shouted, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for embezzlement, securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." Blake's knees buckled. He looked from the police to me, his eyes wide with disbelief that morphed instantly into pure, unadulterated rage. "You!" he snarled, saliva flying from his mouth. "You set me up, you crazy, vindictive witch!" He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. The audience gasped, but he never reached me. 2 private security guards, whom I had hired specifically for this moment, intercepted him mid-air. They slammed him to the floor with a bone-jarring thud. Blake struggled against their weight, his face pressed against the carpet, screaming, "She is insane. Do not listen to her. She belongs in an asylum." I walked over to where he was pinned. I knelt down, heedless of my expensive dress, until my face was inches from his ear. The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. "I am not crazy," Blake, I whispered, my voice ice cold. I am just the person who finally won the pot. I bet $5,000 that you would lose everything in 5 minutes. I stood up and nodded to the officers. Get him out of my sight. They hauled him up. He was weeping now, a broken, sobbing mess, dragged out of the hall in handcuffs while the cameras flashed relentlessly. His career, his reputation, and his life were incinerated in real time. As the doors closed behind him, Titan, the CEO of Nexus Corp, walked up to the stage. He looked at the screen, then at me. He looked shaken. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice grave. "The data in that presentation. The real data. That was your work. Wasn't it Project Ether is yours?" "It is," I replied simply. "And I have the timestamps to prove it." "We will not sue," Titan said quickly, extending a hand. "In fact, I would like to offer you a contract. We need minds like yours, not whatever Blake was." I shook his hand briefly. "Talk to my lawyer, Mr. Titan. He handles my business now." I turned and walked off the stage, leaving the stunned murmurs of the elite behind me. I walked down the aisle and out the front doors of the building. The sun was shining outside, bright and blinding. Standing near the valet stand was Valerie. She had watched the whole thing on the lobby monitors. She didn't smile, and neither did I. We exchanged a single, solemn nod, an acknowledgement of a debt paid and a shackle broken. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the city. I pulled my phone from my purse. I opened the tracking app Blake had installed on my device years ago to monitor my movements. Delete. I opened his contact card. Delete. A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb. The driver rolled down the window. "Where to?" "Lady." I got in and closed the door, shutting out the noise of the sirens approaching in the distance. I leaned back against the seat, feeling the first true breath of air fill my lungs in 5 years. "The airport," I said, looking out at the skyline. "International terminal. I have a one-way ticket to Paris. I was not just a survivor. I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed this journey of justice and reclamation. Please let me know in the comments down below where you are listening from and what you thought of Morgan's revenge. I would love to read your thoughts and chat with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel. Like this video and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.